Welcome everyone to our virtual pre-conference today. Thanks for hanging in there with us for a few minutes while we got settled. This is an ALCTS virtual pre-conference called Creating Successful Scholarly Communication with an Institutional Repository. This has been a three-part virtual pre-conference with the first two sessions held on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week. I'm Rita Sinha, co-chair of the ALCTS Program Committee and your host for this presentation. Today's session is Engaging Faculty in Your Scholarly Communication Program, SHERPA, RoMEO, and Web of Science to the Rescue. Our presenters today are Sue Kunda and Deanne Bruner, both from Oregon State University. Sue is the Digital Scholarship Librarian at Oregon State University, where her responsibilities include managing the institutional repository Scholars Archive at OSU. She recruits content for the IR by consulting with faculty and academic units, developing relationships with stakeholders inside and outside the OSU community, and providing general reference services to OSU students, faculty, staff, and community users. She's been with the OSU Libraries and Press for 6 years and sits on the DSpace Community Advisory Team. Before we start, there are a few things to keep in mind for today's webinar. If you wish to comment on today's presentation using Twitter, you may use the hashtag you see on the screen, but we won't be monitoring the Twitter feed during the session. If you have questions for the presenters, please type them into the question box on your screen. We've set aside time at the end of the presentation for questions, and we'll probably stop once or twice during the presentation to take a few questions as well. Questions that we can't get to during the session or at the end of it will be answered offline, and the answers will be sent to all of the attendees. Today's webinar does not have interactive chat capabilities. If you want to reduce the toolbar on your screen so you can see the slides a bit better, click on the red arrow. This presentation is being recorded, and you will receive an email with links to the recording, the presentation slides, and an evaluation within 2 days. We hope you'll take the time to fill out the evaluation form that will be sent to you after the session, since it's used by the Continuing Education Committee and the Program Committee to plan future presentations. And with that, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Anne.
Hi, I'm assuming you meant Sue. This is Sue Kunda, and Deanne is sitting right next to me, but we've had some technical difficulties, so she'll just be here and punching me if she wants to say something.
I'll say hello from far away.
So we're here today to talk about how we've engaged with faculty at Oregon State University regarding their scholarly outputs, specifically their published peer-reviewed journal articles. As a scholarly communications librarian, I've helped initiate and design several of the workflows that we'll talk about today. But really, it's Deanne and other library technicians who carry the brunt of the work. Without them, our program simply wouldn't be where it is today. And I wanted to take the time to acknowledge that. So thank you, Diane. And also, I want to make a note that unfortunately, I'm in a room where multiple librarians use this computer for webinars and didn't realize that the main screen has been changed, so my main screen doesn't show. If I'm showing it in edit mode, I would go through the process of changing it, but I'm afraid with the technical problems that we've had recently, I hope you'll be okay with this. So I apologize for that. Okay, so here are the 3 things that we hope you will get out of the webinar today. We want you to understand how SHERPA RoMEO can fit into a scholarly communication program. We want you to know how to search SHERPA RoMEO for publisher permissions, and we want you to be able to create a Web of Science search specific to your institution. According to Cullen and Chauner, the open access movement of the past decade and the development of institutional repository technology during that same time period have openly challenged the traditional scholarly communication system. And this chart that you see from the Directory of Open Access Repositories illustrates the number of repositories worldwide and percentages by countries. And as you can see here, about 20% of institutional repositories are located in North America. And it's not just MIT and Harvard and other large universities that are launching institutional repositories. Smaller colleges and universities, both research-based and those with a liberal arts bent, are also acquiring IR technologies. Even community colleges, as you can see here, recognize the benefits of having an IR as a tool for capturing and managing, archiving, and making available the various outputs of their campuses. So IRs clearly appeal to academic libraries where they're usually hosted, and to many university administrators. Unfortunately, the academic community itself hasn't really embraced the technology. As librarians, we recognize both the extrinsic and intrinsic benefits to researchers, which are listed on the next two slides. The extrinsic benefits, the rewards of depositing research in an IR for researchers include increased accessibility, as research in an open access repository isn't locked behind toll access or publisher paywalls, which can then in turn provide more impact for their work and ultimately more publicity. An institutional repository associated with an institution of higher education can also provide a sense of authority or credibility to deposited documents. Researchers can gain greater recognition for their work beyond the community of scholars within their discipline. All of these things can then lead to greater academic reward for the researcher. Librarians also see that depositing research in an institutional repository can appeal to researchers' desire to help others and advance knowledge and creativity. And lastly, the library community views the IR as a trusted management system for research outputs, which leaves faculty free from concerns of broken links, failed servers, and defunct publishing houses. Academics, unfortunately, see IRs differently. They're pretty much accustomed to the well-established system of academic journal publishing. And this publishing has the very familiar processes of both peer review and subscription-based dissemination practices. And so researchers see little merit in depositing their work in an IR. According to a 2011 Carnegie Mellon study, the barriers to deposit most often cited by academics include concerns about copyright and publisher policies, and we've seen that time and time again here at Oregon State. That's one of their main concerns. And secondly, the belief that access to others' work is not an issue in their disciplines. So that's really not an issue for them. And earlier when I talked about the extrinsic benefits, where it would allow them to see work from other disciplines, they don't really see that as being a benefit. And then the last thing, which study after study shows, is that the time and effort required by researchers is also a barrier to self-archiving. And we sometimes think that, well, it only takes 10, 15 minutes to deposit an article or less. But because they are doing this fairly infrequently, faculty are required to relearn the technical process each time, and then they also have to identify copyright issues, making the process just too burdensome for them. These quotes reflect the concerns, those concerns I just discussed and others, and some that we've heard here at Oregon State. While sometimes I may not agree with a faculty member's perspective, I always respect their point of view. And my goal ultimately is to help our faculty succeed where they're at, not where I'm at. So for example, we recently had a researcher who was very concerned about an article of his being in the repository because he didn't want his downloads diluted. The journal he published in has a very sophisticated recording system, including altmetrics, and we just can't match that with our IR. I therefore found a different sort of workaround. It worked to make sure that his current concerns were addressed. And I always make sure that I do that, and I think Deanne does too when she's doing her projects. So when we decided that we wanted to share the benefits of the IR with faculty, we needed a way to directly engage with them. Several of our subject librarians who were staunch advocates of open access and understood the promise of Scholars Archive, which is the name of our institutional repository, pointed us to SHERPA RoMEO. It was kind of like a superhero to us. SHERPA RoMEO is a database of publisher self-archiving permissions hosted by the University of Nottingham, which is really kind of appropriate if you think about it. The journal information is provided by several other European organizations, and the self-archiving information comes from several of their collaborative colleagues and also users of the service. In fact, there have been times when we've noticed that publishers' policies are in conflict with the information on SHERPA RoMEO, and we've contacted them with suggestions for updates to the policy. And they actively encourage that, and they're really great about doing that. So I'm going to start by finding out just how familiar everyone is with SHERPA RoMEO. That way, if everyone has lots of experience with the service, I'll just run through it real quickly. If there are a number of listeners who are fairly new to the website, I'll go a little bit slower. Either way, once I'm done demonstrating SHERPA RoMEO, we'll stop for a bit for questions. So, how familiar are you with SHERPA RoMEO? And I'm going to launch the poll now. You should see it on your screen. Okay, it looks like we've got almost everybody. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to share the results with you. As you can see, we've got people that are all over the board on experience. It looks like we have at least one person who's an expert user. So if I get anything wrong today, please be sure to let me know. But for the rest of you, we'll go through it. And we're not going to get real detailed when we go into SHERPA RoMEO because it can get very detailed. But I just wanted to give you a rough overview of that. So anyway, okay. So this is the website itself. It's really not something much to look at, but it does the job. And this is the website. Oh, excuse me, and the URL. So one of the first things you'll notice in SHERPA RoMEO is the color coding, which unfortunately doesn't mesh exactly with the open access definition of green open access, and it can often cause confusion. For example, as you can see here, a green policy on SHERPA RoMEO means you can deposit the preprint and either the postprint or the publisher's version, while green open access, when we're talking about that in open access, a green means that it's the act of depositing a postprint into a repository. So there's a little difference in between the two. So in all honesty, we don't really pay much attention to these colors, but it's good to be aware of them. Oops. One thing to note, however, SHERPA RoMEO uses 3 terms for referring to the versions of an article. The preprint is the first version in the process. It's the original submission to the journal and doesn't include any peer review. We don't put, as a general rule, we don't put preprints into our IR because we found that most authors are hesitant to place anything online that hasn't at least gone through the peer review process, or they also are concerned about somebody scooping them on their research. So we don't even ask for preprints. And sometimes it's hard enough to get them to see the benefits of placing their accepted manuscript in the IR, so we stay away from those. The second version, as you can see, is the postprint, or as we call it, the accepted manuscript. The term postprint can be pretty confusing, so we try to stay away from using that word. The accepted manuscript is the author's final submission to the journal. Before it's had a peer review process, but it's before all the corrections and changes, all the copy editing has taken place. And then there's the publisher's version, or the publisher's PDF. This is the manuscript as it appears in the journal. It's gone through the peer review process, it's been copy edited, formatted, and it's the final version. It's also referred to as the version of record. It used to be fairly easy to distinguish between the author's accepted manuscript and the publisher's version, but many publishers now either have templates for their authors to use, or they require authors to format the final manuscript exactly as it will appear in the journal. And I know I've mistakenly asked an author for another version, thinking that it was the final record, but I've gotten an email back saying, no, this is actually the accepted manuscript. So we're going to go ahead and do a simple search. First of all, when you get to the home page, you see the search box over there. And I'm going to search on Proceedings of the American Mathematical Society. So I make sure that I've checked journal titles and exact title, and then I'm going to search. And this is what the result. Number one is the RoMEO color, which, as I said before, we basically ignore because we look at the information next to number 2, and that's where we find which version we can deposit. In this instance, any version is eligible, which is great. The information in the general conditions tells me the rules I have to follow when I deposit an item published by that particular journal. And you can see here that we need to use the publisher's set statement. We can use the publisher's PDF, and we can use it on open access repositories as long as they're non-commercial. Also, UK authors can deposit to an open access repository that's over there. The publisher's self-archiving policy or copyright information can be found by following the links in number 4, and the publisher's website is linked at number 5. And also, I forgot that up at the top, the journal, you can go directly to the journal if you see that link right there. And this is the standard format for any record in SHERPA RoMEO. So if you see one, you've pretty much seen them all. So here is a record in our institutional repository of an item from the American Mathematical Society Proceedings. You can see the record on the left, where you can open the PDF 2 different ways. We've also highlighted, or I've highlighted, that we've put the description that it's the version of record. And then down at the bottom, we've used the publisher's statement. Over on the right, you can see the, over on the right, you can see the accepted manuscript. Actually, this is like I said, a version of record, sorry. You can also, in SHERPA RoMEO, search on a publisher name. So for this instance, this is a listing. This is for Elsevier. So if I click on Elsevier, here's a listing of Elsevier's default policies. At the top is a link to Elsevier itself, and below that are various the links to their various self-archiving policies. And they have a number of different ones, different policies. So the first time that we go in and look at a record, we would look at each of these policies just to get an idea of what those are. Also below that, you can see I have highlighted, actually, let me get there. Right here you can see where it talks about these are the publisher's default policies. Individual journals may have special permissions, especially if they involve other organizations or have paid open access options. And that's something to be very aware of. We make sure that we check the journal, not the publisher. Also, you can see that you can put the postprint. You're allowed to put the author's postprint into the repository according to their SHERPA RoMEO record. And just remember that the postprint is the author's accepted manuscript. And then these are just the general conditions of Elsevier's policies. And we'd plan to have you practice doing a search yourself, but we understand that the technology, if you open a couple of windows, makes it difficult. So we're just going to go ahead and run through it really quickly for you. And we're going to search Nature, and we were actually going to have you answer some questions, very simple questions. So here is the record for Nature. And the question would be, can the publisher's PDF be archived? And you look at that, and obviously, no. Then the second question is, can the author's postprint be archived? And in this instance, yes. And that dotted check mark next to it means that there are restrictions on the postprint. And in this case, the restrictions, you have to look below it to see the restrictions. And so our next question was going to be, what is the restriction for postprints for Nature? And you have to put a 6-month embargo on them. So now I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions just about the SHERPA RoMEO and how it looks.
So again, if you have any questions, you can type them into your question box, and I'll read them off for Sue. I don't see anything coming in. Of course, you can type them as Sue does her presentation. I can save them up for the next break that we take. Oh, we do have one question. Where does SHERPA RoMEO get their records? Do you know?
Yes, as I said earlier, they work with other other organizations, and I can't remember the name of them, but there are a couple of organizations in the UK and other places in Europe that actually contain the records, and so they download those records into their database.
Okay. Then we have another question. Is SHERPA RoMEO freely available?
Yes, it's openly available to anyone. If you just type in SHERPA RoMEO into Google, it will come right up.
Okay, great. Just giving, okay, there's another question. How would you respond to a faculty member who doesn't see the value of an IR because they share their articles via academic social media and BitTorrent?
I'm going to get to that a little bit later, but I'll go ahead and address that. Like I said, we always meet the faculty member where they are, and if they're very adamant that they do not feel they need to put their work in the institutional repository, we wouldn't push it. However, we will usually send an email saying that we understand the issues, and we might talk about how the institutional repository benefits them as opposed to these other types of dissemination methods. But we would always thank them for their concern and then tell them that we appreciate their contacting us. But again, we're very careful not to push faculty into something that they don't want to do. And I'll just add to that one of the tips I was going to share with you is that I think it's always best to work with faculty that are amenable to depositing in the IR, and that's kind of how we started. We started with a couple faculty, and then we found a department that was amenable, and then we found another department who kind of felt competitive with that other department, and so we kind of played them against one another a little bit. So I learned long ago that you just go for the people that are really willing to go along with you and what you're doing, and just kind of ignore those others, especially those that are very adamant that this is not for them.
So we can take a couple more questions, or Sue, would you rather we move on? I
think we should move on.
Okay, so I'll save the other, I've got 2 more questions. I'll save those for the next break.
Okay, great. Thanks. So for the first 4 or 5 years after we launched our repository, we used SHERPA RoMEO to engage with faculty in 3 ways. We used SHERPA RoMEO to identify journals that allowed us to deposit the publisher's version into the IR, and we used SHERPA RoMEO to check faculty Vida for eligible deposits, And we use SHERPA RoMEO to deposit research in the IR in advance of news stories about the studies, which is a fairly unique process, and we'll get to that. So we're going to show you our workflows for these projects, but you're more than welcome, and you're probably going to find that you'll have to use other workflows that will work at your institution. So the first one I'm going to talk about is using SHERPA RoMEO to engage with faculty about putting their PDFs in, using SHERPA RoMEO to identify publishers that allow the deposit of their PDFs. So this is one way, this is a really good way to initiate contact with faculty. It's fairly painless for everybody because you're just asking for permission. They don't have to do anything other than answer your email. And it's a way to start getting the word out about the IR in a really, in a pretty innocuous manner. And also you can do it one article at a time so you won't get overwhelmed. At first I did all the work myself, including making the deposits, but I eventually had a student or two helping with the deposits. And that's, I think at that point, that's when Deanne came in and started helping me. When I first started working with SHERPA RoMEO, there were 52 publishers that allowed the use of their PDFs in SHERPA RoMEO, and now it's almost 600. So here's what our process looked like. This is linked to the list of the publishers, and here's the listing. And you can see that the list gets updated fairly often. When I did the screenshot, it was obviously the 22nd of May, and I checked last night, and it had been yesterday. It was updated yesterday, as a matter of fact. So it gets updated fairly quickly. The journals listed first are those who allow the use of their PDF with no restrictions, which means no embargo periods. Further down are journals with various embargo periods ranging from 1 month to 5 years. One of our liaison librarians, one of those staunch open access advocates, suggested that I start with American Geophysical Union because a number of our faculty publish in their journals. So that's where I started first. I used the list to find publishers that I knew our faculty published with. And one of those publishers, before I started, I need to go back a minute. So before I started searching for OSU authored papers, I would usually go to the link first. So I used the SHERPA RoMEO record to find the link, and then that would take me to AGU with the information here. A little bit further down on the page, in the second part of the page here, you can see that indeed I can use the PDF, and in fact I have to use the PDF if I remember rightly. And Deanne's saying yes, that's right. And the posting that I need to put a 6-month embargo on the posting. So the next step was I needed to find articles written by OSU authors. And this same process works in a variety of different publications. I've used it for physics publications and all kinds of publishers. So you just go up to Search Pubs button. Then I searched for author affiliation. I used Oregon State University. And as you can see, there are over 1,000 articles here. I sorted the list by date. I think the other one is sort by rank. Anyway, I sorted by date and put the most recent first. The reason for that is because we usually want to contact authors as soon as possible after their work has been published, when it's fresh in their mind. And so here's a record for one of those articles. And then this is the letter that I wrote to the faculty member. And actually this is adapted from a letter that Paul Royster, who is a scholarly communications librarian at Nebraska, created. It includes information about the article, the publisher, and the embargo period. And the email also included some information about Scholars Archive, the benefits, and just a little bit. I don't put a lot in there. And then at the bottom, asking permission to deposit the PDF. And we got a number of replies back saying, go ahead. after a while, we eventually added to the email, if we don't hear from you within 2 weeks, we'll assume you'd like us to submit the article. And then we'd go ahead and submit the article. So here is Professor Jager's article in the IR. As you can see, I've highlighted that it's a version of record. And then at the bottom, I've put the publisher's statement in there. Also, the publisher requires that there's a copyright statement clearly noted on it, and you can see the copyright statement is there at the bottom. Also, must have the name of the title of the journal on the top. So the next thing that we did was check faculty Vida. But I have to warn you about this. This work takes a lot of time, and the results can be fairly disheartening. Faculty often after we'd go through all this work, wouldn't send us their accepted manuscripts. So we eventually decided to check Vida only for those faculty who either approached us about it or seemed eager to see their work in the IR. And we had fairly good luck when we limited the service to those two groups. The process started when someone, at first it was me, then Deanne, would look at the author's Vida, here's an example, and then we'd copy and paste the information into an Excel spreadsheet like this, because we had the fields that we wanted to use. So the reason why we did that is because then when you're in Excel, it's much easier to sort on the publisher, and so you can just fill that information real quickly. Also, we put in there, I know you can't see this, and I'll make sure that when I send out the slideshow, I'll put a slide in that has, that you can see this clearly. But we also put on there the self-archiving policies and the self-archiving procedures. And it was really easy to fill those in if we had it in an Excel spreadsheet. But that's probably the reason why it took us so long to do it. And you may decide if you want to check faculty Vida that you're not going to do that and you'll do it another way. And that's fine. So this is the email that I would send to the faculty member. It's been edited a little bit because I wanted it to fit on the slide, but the email is usually included like the number of items that could be deposited into Scholars Archive. You can see that there are 4. And also there are 5 items where we had to use the author's accepted manuscript. For the 4 items that we could just use the publisher's PDF, we would just pull that from the publisher's website and add those to Scholars Archive. And with the 5 that we needed the author's accepted manuscript, we would ask for that. Also in these emails, I made sure to include a description of what an accepted manuscript was, because they often don't understand that. And that's often the most misunderstood, misread, or not read part of the email. And then I would also attach the spreadsheet. We also color-coded it, and I would remove all the extraneous information, like if we couldn't find information about self-archiving, we would take those off and other things. And it was just the ones that we knew that they could send to us. And here's the IR record of one of the journal articles that we got. And this is using the version of record. And this is one where we received the accepted manuscript. The third way of engaging with faculty actually grew out of a conversation that we had with University Advancement, and it's still one of my favorite ways to connect with faculty. The News and Research Communications Office indicated that they were having difficulty getting their hands on copies of the research that they were writing about, and they needed to share this information with news organizations. Often the news services wanted to check the facts before they passed the story on to their readers. And so we came up with the following workflow. So first of all, this is an email I would get from one of the writers. And with this one, the publisher's version was attached to the email so that I could find the bibliographic information. So the writers either send the bibliographic information within the email or they'll just attach it. And they receive the publisher's PDF from the faculty member. So then I looked it up in SHERPA RoMEO and saw that yes, we can archive the postprint. And then this is my letter that I sent to the faculty member. And it's very similar to the one you saw before. Then after getting the accepted manuscript or whichever version we needed from the author, I would go ahead and deposit it into Scholars Archive and then send the handle or the permanent URL over to News and Research Communication. And you can see here at the top they have put the information right at the very top and a link to the information in Scholars Archive. So then this press release goes out to thousands of news organizations. And here's an example of a news story using that press release and where they have put a link to the research article in Scholars Archive. And then after the news release is sent out, the news writer sends to me a bit.ly that has access to the news story itself. So a reader can either use the news story, read the news story, they can read the research itself, or they can read both of them. And this has been a great way to connect with faculty because I have rarely yet been turned down for an accepted manuscript because these stories are about them, and so this is one way of engaging with faculty that's very rewarding. So I'm going to stop here again and see if there are any questions about those three processes.
So we do have some questions from the last time, so maybe I'll go back to a couple of those while some others come in. Let's see. We have one that says, we've noticed that not all publishers are in the SHERPA database. What is the scope that determines which publishers are included?
Usually it's based on who has done or who has, if the information has been deposited into the database either by one of their colleagues or by, like, a user will find it. But sometimes we'll have to go out and kind of search because it's not in SHERPA RoMEO.
All right. So the next question is, does your institution have a policy for depositing if research results come from public funding?
Our institution actually has an open access policy that has nothing to do with funding. But speaking about funding, some funding agencies, as you know, probably like the NIH and the NSF, and probably there are going to be even more, require articles and research outputs to be deposited either in a subject-based repository such as I can't think of one right off the top of my head. Archive, is that? Or an institutional repository. So so OSU itself doesn't require that, but the funding agencies do. Oh, and PubMed. Thanks, DM. However, as I said, we do have an open access policy where they are required to, actually what they're required to do is give an exclusive license to OSU so that OSU can then disseminate that research, and the library is tasked with getting those research outputs and putting them in the institutional repository.
Okay. Do you primarily rely on SHERPA RoMEO, or do you also look at individual contracts that the authors have associated with a particular work?
We rely on SHERPA RoMEO for the majority of what we do. However, we will ask sometimes, have you signed, for example, I think for a while, Wiley would allow us to use the preprint only, but they would allow the postprint if the author had a signed CTA that agreed with that. So we would ask the authors, do you have that in your CTA? And we would ask for that. We never found an author that did, but we will look at CTA if authors want us to.
Another question about SHERPA RoMEO. Have you ever found outdated or inaccurate records in SHERPA RoMEO Do you ever double check their records by going to the journal permissions page itself?
Yes, we do that quite often, and Deanne is great about doing that, probably more than I would even. But yes, they are inaccurate at times. And like I said, it's important to go out there. And Deanne is doing this enough. I don't do it nearly as often as I used to, but Deanne is doing this often enough that she knows those publishers' policies very well. And in fact, she'll tell us when a publisher policy has changed, because we'll see in SHERPA RoMEO that something has changed. For example, when I first started, AGU, American Geophysical Union, didn't have an embargo policy at all. You could put the accepted manuscript in without an embargo, but now they do require an embargo. So Deanne finds those types of things quite often.
Okay, and maybe this is a quick one. Does your library use PlumX for Vidas?
I'm sorry.
Plum Analytics?
Oh, no, we do not.
Okay. We have quite a few more. You tell me when, Sue, if you want to move on.
I'll go ahead and move on.
Okay, we'll save the rest for
Sure.
the end of the session. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, while the above projects got us talking to faculty about the institutional repository and its benefits, we were really kind of working on an ad hoc basis. And in the case of Vida checking, we were spending a lot of time on articles that had been written in the past, and we weren't getting a lot of current items. So what we really needed was a more systematic method for ingesting faculty articles, and that's where Web of Science comes in. A former librarian set up a weekly Web of Science feed that included all authors, authored or co-authored by OSU faculty, and had it delivered to Deanne's mailbox. And so she uses that each week. And I'm just going to go through a Web of Science, doing that in Web of Science, just to show you what the process is. And I hope some of you may be very familiar with this, probably even more than I am, so please bear with me. I'll try to do this quickly. So we just set up a basic search using Oregon State University. We use wildcards and truncated because sometimes there will be publications that will shorten those names, and so we did that. And then also we search on Web of Science core collection. Then these are the results we get. We click on more options because we want to exclude some types of documents. We exclude meeting abstracts, book reviews, and editorial material. And click on exclude. Then if you go to search history and save the history, then you have to name the search. And we named it Web of Science feed and put in a description that it was going to be our weekly RSS feed. We unchecked email alerts because we didn't want alerts coming into our email box. And then also check frequency. We do it weekly. You might want to start monthly if you're a small organization, or if you want to start slowly. Anyway, and then we save. And then as you can see, there's the RSS feed there, so go ahead and close. Once you come to this screen, you open your saved history, and there's the RSS feed. By clicking on that, it will bring up the RSS feed, and you can have the RSS feed come to several places. Because I'm on a Mac, I would use Live Bookmarks because it doesn't really support, Mac doesn't really support doing RSS feeds to Outlook. But Deanne works on a Dell, so she uses Microsoft Outlook. And this is what it looks like when it comes into her email account. Then here's an example of an article that came in, and Deanne would then check the SHERPA RoMEO record. And this one, it says publisher's version cannot be used in a repository, but may be used on author's personal website or author's institutional profile website. So sometimes we'll have faculty asking us about whether they can put something on their website. And in this instance, they can go ahead and put the publisher's version, but we can't. And then here is the accepted manuscript in the institutional repository. Excuse me, I kind of got that backwards, sorry. So this is a letter that we sent to Dr. Hurwitz. And then here it is in the IR. Here's other examples of author-accepted manuscripts, because we find that we get a lot of different types of outputs, and there are a lot of different accepted manuscripts. As you can see, the one on the left almost looks like it's a published version, but it is the author's accepted manuscript, whereas the one on the right is a lot more typical of a lot of the types of accepted manuscripts we'll get. And we've even gotten them without any names or titles or anything. Fortunately now we put a cover sheet on where we would put that information, but we've also either sent it back to the researcher and asked for a name and title, or we'll put it on ourselves. Okay. So here are some of the questions that we get when we send out those emails to faculty. Are you sure the publisher will allow this? And usually if they're very trepidatious about this, we will go ahead and copy and paste the information from the FAQ. We don't use the SHERPA RoMEO information. We'll go right to the journal article, and the journal, excuse me, and find the self-archiving policies and copy and paste them into the email. But we have had several faculty members that still are very unsure about this, but again, we don't push. We have faculty members that will sometimes say, well, the accepted manuscript just doesn't do my work justice. For example, we have a researcher who's doing research on volcanoes on Mars, and he doesn't feel that the photos render nearly as well as they do in the published version, so he prefers not to put his work in the institutional repository. And then another question we get is, why should I put my research in Scholars Archive if it's already open access? And this is one we've kind of been struggling with. The reason, if a researcher is really adamant, and in fact I can think of one who just real adamant about that, and so I just don't push, and he's right, is open access, and that's really what we want. The issue with having it on a publisher's website or having it open access is if you put the accepted manuscript in institutional repository, that can be used by other researchers. And whereas sometimes, even though it will be open access on a publisher's website, that doesn't mean you can use it in any way you want to. There might be restrictions on it. And also, the copyright is still held, usually, by the publisher. So I think that is it for today. Hopefully I'll have some more tips. I know that, I know what I wanted to tell you. One of the things I really wanted to stress for this is when you do this, start small. We started our Web of Science project, and we just went and got all of our faculty articles, and we get between, it's probably, yeah, Deanne got 44 this morning, and it's been as low as about 20, 25, and as many as 88. So trying to get through all those in 1 week can be very daunting. So I would recommend, if you know there are several faculty that are very amenable to this, start with a couple faculty. If you have a department that you know is eager to embrace open access or has made noises in that direction, then I would start with them. Excuse me. And one other thing, with our Web of Science project, I just looked at the statistics today, and we're getting somewhere right around 59 to 60% of the articles that we've requested. And interestingly enough, we were getting that amount before we passed our open access policy, and it really hasn't changed at all since the open access policy. So we are being very, very successful. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we do have a lot of questions here. One is, what sort of use statistics can you generate from your IR?
Our institutional repository has individual statistics for each item. It also has statistics for each community and each collection. Unfortunately, at the time, those aren't working right now because we went through migration and those haven't been updated yet. But those three types of statistics. Also, there are administrative statistics, so you can see what types of searches are being done, what are the top downloaded items, and things like that for the overall institutional repository.
And this refers to something that you might have said earlier in the presentation, that a faculty member thought the IR would dilute, depositing in the IR would dilute his usage statistics. Can you clarify what that objection was and how it was resolved?
Sure. And this happened to be a faculty member I worked with news and research communication, and he didn't realize that when they put out the URL that it would take them to Scholars Archive or our institutional repository, and he had deposited this article in PLOS. So he wanted all links to link directly to PLOS, because PLOS has really good statistics. It tells how many downloads, I think how many times it's been tweeted about, and all those different types of things. So and we've heard that from a number of researchers, that they want all the links to go directly to the journal itself. And I can understand that. The way I solved the problem was the news release had already gone out, so that I couldn't go out and change that. So we were going to have people linking from the news release. So what I did was, on the record, instead of having his research there, I replaced that with a Word document that had a screenshot of the front page, and then it had a link to the PLOS, the article in PLOS, and said the version of record of this article is in PLOS 1. So that way, when they came to us, we got the download for coming to us, and then he got the download from PLOS.
All right, the next question, where do you include the bit.ly link to the news release in OSU's IR?
Let me see if I can get back to that. We include that in the description, which is actually on the front page of the, here real quickly. I keep saying real quickly and then I'm really slow. Okay, you can see it here. This is the news coverage, news release, and then there's the bit.ly down here.
All right. Are you able to load SHERPA RoMEO records into your IR?
No, not at this particular time. But I know that I'm thinking if there are certain, we use DSpace, and if you use the JSP UI interface, which we don't use, we use an XML user interface, I believe SHERPA RoMEO records are actually part of that interface. And there are also many, I shouldn't say many, but there are universities that have figured out ways to ingest the information from in SHERPA RoMEO into their workflow. We haven't done that yet.
All right, the next two questions are kind of related. If you have an open access policy, why do you have to seek out faculty for their materials? Isn't it part of the workflow to deposit with you unless they opt out?
Well, yes, that would be great if they did that. But even though we passed an open access policy, and I think this is very common for almost anybody who is working with an open access policy, we found the same, I'm talking with MIT and Kansas, that even though you have an open access policy as the way they're set up in the United States, faculty do not, for the most part, they don't take active part, they're not active participants. However, in the UK and other parts of Europe, they are more active because it is mandated, and before they can, they actually have to show their research results, and they don't, being part of that, they have a whole program of reporting their research results, and they have to have their articles in the IR to do that. So they get much more participation from faculty, whereas here in the United States, we don't.
Next question, again related to faculty. What do you do when faculty don't have post-print or a copy of a publishing agreement?
Okay, if they don't have a copy of the post-print, usually they can contact one of their co-authors. Usually they'll find a co-author that has it. If they don't have it, they don't have it and we can't put it in. As far as the publishing agreement, we don't really need to see the publishing agreement. So, yeah, and often I'm sure they couldn't find their publishing agreements.
For open access journal articles, do you still post a copy to the IR based on publisher's policy, or do you simply link out to the article?
We don't have any records in our institutional repository, other than that one that I kind of cheated on, that link out, so they're not just metadata records. We always include a file with ours. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, so if it's already open access, I spoke about that earlier. If it's already open access, we will try to get the article in Scholars Archive, but if they prefer to have it just on the open access site, we'll do that.
Sue, could you go back to your last slide so they can see your contact information? And
sure. While
you do that, I've got one last question, it seems, unless something rolls in. This goes back to SHERPA RoMEO. Why aren't some publishers listed in SHERPA RoMEO?
Well, I think a lot of times there are publishers that just don't even post their self-archiving policies on their website. So I would imagine that's a lot of the reason. And but you can always go ahead and email them if you're so inclined. We don't.
Okay.
Oh, Deanne tells me that sometimes we do if it's in if it's in DOAJ, which is the Directory of Open Access Journals.
Another question, can a reason to convince a user to deposit include long-term preservation, conservation?
Yes, that is a very good reason to place it in the IR. And I did speak to that, but I probably didn't make it very plain. But when I was talking about the intrinsic benefits and the faculty members' self-interest, that is one thing. They don't have to worry about if their server goes down. They don't have to worry if the publishing house becomes defunct or something. They don't have to worry about links breaking. So yes.
Well, we're at time, and I don't see any more questions. So I wanted to thank Sue and Deanne for an overview of SHERPA RoMEO and how OSU has used the service to engage faculty and others on campus with regard to their IR. And I want to also thank all of our attendees, and thank you all for your questions. You'll soon receive a short online evaluation form, and we hope you'll take a few minutes to fill it out so that we can use your comments both in the programming committee and the continuing education committee to plan future pre-conferences and webinars. Before we end, I'd like to remind you that there's still time to sign up for another 3-part ALCTS virtual pre-conference that's being held next week. It's entitled Library Preservation Today. There's a URL, a link on the screen that'll take you to the registration webpage and more details about this pre-conference. And I'm not able to fast forward here. Oh, and if you're attending the conference in Las Vegas, we're offering 3 pre-conferences on site. The pre-registration ends for these on Friday, but you can also register in person when you're at the conference. Details and registration about the fundamentals of collection assessment pre-conference, which is a day and a half, and another day-long pre-conference. All the details are at the link that's on your screen. Statistics and reports, data-driven decision-making is the second pre-conference that's being offered. And then there's a half-day conference, streaming media passes the tipping point. Now what? I just wanted to thank you again for attending and thank the speakers. Do send in your evaluation form, and if you have ideas for future presentations, webinars, you can contact me or you can go to the ALCTS website. There's a web page called Plan an Event. Before we end, I'd like to thank Eva Sorrell of the Continuing Education Committee and Vicki in the ALCTS office for providing technical and administrative support for today's presentation. The support Eva and ALCTS staff provide make it possible for us to present these webinars to you. Thank you again for joining us today, and we hope you'll participate in other ALCTS webinars and continuing education offerings again in the future.